Hey,
Hi.
it's a cold, wet, cold, cold, wet, cold day.
Yeah, as it has been most of the week.
It sucks. It just sucks so much. I just, I got out of bed and it was like, I don't know, it was like rolling into a cold lake.
Yeah, it's that wet cold, like
Gets in
gets in
you.
your bones. We're
Yeah.
gonna be complaining about the weather until like May, probably.
And then it'll be 2 weeks of great weather. And
And
then
then
we'll,
it's too hot. Yep.
right, we'll be complaining about yeah, this is spring in New York City.
And New Jersey lately.
Yes, yes. Uh, well, shall we get started?
Let's.
Okay. Uh, Welcome to Goodnight, Mr. Holmes, a podcast about the Granada Sherlock Holmes, which ran on ITV in the UK between 1984 and 1994 and ran on Masterpiece Mystery in the US around the same time. I'm Laura.
And I'm Rachel.
Today, we are looking at episode 13 in the series, which is called The Final Problem.
The story was first published in The Strand in 1893, although it takes place in 1891, I believe.
Yes, yes. I love that it's episode 13.
The
So
opening theme, I noticed, is more somber and discordant than it normally is.
yeah. So the episode opens with the usual scene of Baker Street, but the music, it's like without the jauntiness.
It's possibly foreshadowing something.
Yes, the violins are like scraping out the music in this vaguely threatening and sorrowful manner. So you don't start out the episode feeling like Holmes is going to tidy everything up like neatly.
But it's called The Final Problem.
And so you're in this uneasy emotional space from the jump. And we see several non-dialogue scenes of Holmes's life being threatened in several ways. He's being run down by a carriage. He's being coshed over the head with some kind of stone masonry that's dropped from a building, somehow getting tangled up in a French flag.
Yeah, that seemed almost like it was out of Hot Fuzz or something.
Right. He's being chased by thugs in what looks like an abandoned, I don't know, cathedral, abbey, something.
Yeah, it looked like it.
And I noticed that like Brett's agility is really at its peak here. He's running around almost like balletically.
Yes.
Although there's that one scene where he closes a door against his attackers, but another door just off to the side remains completely open.
Well, there's a scene coming up shortly where they do something similar with the blinds in Baker Street.
Yes. So we're going to see one of these thugs again later, but we won't know it's him. So back on Baker Street, Watson's returning home from a holiday. He's got golf clubs slung over his shoulder. He says he hasn't seen much of Holmes lately. He knows from the newspapers that Holmes has been helping the French government. And he gets inside. The flat's a mess. There's pipe ash scattered on a cushion. The remains of breakfast is still on the table. And Mrs. Hudson comes in and tells Watson that Holmes arrived back at 221B that morning before 7, asking for breakfast, which we know he never does. And he's been away for 4 months, but he's gone out again after having a visitor. And Mrs. Hudson describes the visitor as an elderly gentleman and says, "They had words. I didn't like the look of him. He had a face like the wrath of God, or should I say, the devil." But she offers Watson some of the best claret to celebrate Holmes's return to Baker Street.
And Watson's like, alcohol sounds great.
Yes, please. So this eerie music continues throughout, and we're meant to be on edge. Mm-hmm. Even as Watson puts it, Baker Street looked as safe and secure as ever.
He says that as he's being tracked through a telescopic lens.
Yes. Yes. And then there's a rapping at the window pane, and Watson grabs a poker and runs to the window.
Yeah, I have the note. He picks up the poker to scream, "What?" at whoever is knocking incessantly.
So it's Holmes, obviously, knocking at the window. He's gesturing frantically. Watson helps Holmes inside, and Holmes shushes him.
This is the window into Holmes's bedroom in the back, by the way.
Right.
It's not the window into Baker Street, which was my first thought. I'm like, surely the door would have been more discreet.
Right. No, it's the side. Yeah, the
Yeah,
side.
it's the garden entrance.
So,
And
Holmes,
he's climbed up to the second floor.
yes, somehow without a grappling hook.
Yeah.
And then Holmes runs into the sitting room and hides behind an apothecary cabinet, which he never does. And Watson says, "What is it?" "Air guns," says Holmes.
I had to look this up because I didn't know what an air gun was. Air guns use compressed air to fire projectiles. A regular pistol uses combustion of chemical propellants.
BB guns are air guns. So he asks Watson to draw the blinds, and we see
casually, as though he's the only person in the room.
Yes. And we see from the building across the street, there's a light shining from one of the windows. And Holmes also goes and pulls down a window shade himself, even though he's just told Watson that he has to do it.
And nobody closes the blind in the middle window.
No. And then Holmes asks Watson for a light. When Watson says he doesn't look well, Holmes tells him, "I've been using myself rather too freely. I have been somewhat pressed of late." Like, I don't even know what that means. Given that he can't leave the apartment till dark because reasons we don't know, he's being pursued. He agrees to tell Watson what's been going on, and Watson reaches for his notebook as Holmes tells him this case is unique to the annals of crime.
Aren't they all?
Yes, right. So 4 months ago, he'd been engaged by the French government to go to the Louvre, and we see him arriving at a building that looks nothing like the Louvre.
The one time I was in Paris, the Louvre was closed, even though it wasn't a scheduled closing. The guidebook was like, yeah, that happens sometimes.
Yes.
Thanks, guys, for closing it randomly the one time I could be here.
Right. They have this big Musée du Louvre sign outside. I mean, again, I've been to the Louvre. It looks nothing like the Louvre. It bothered me so much. So Holmes is walking around the galleries with a couple of Frenchmen looking at paintings, and they're yammering at him. And finally, he smacks his hand into the wall and says, "Gentlemen, can we come to the point? I presume the Mona Lisa has been stolen." And it's like there's this empty space on the wall. So
they're like, "What?" He's like, "Well, this is where the Mona Lisa is supposed to be, and it's empty, and you asked me here, so
you put it together." So we find that the painting had been moved to a storeroom temporarily. They had covered its frame with a glass pane because they feared acid attacks. In reality, the Mona Lisa wasn't covered by glass until the mid-1950s, which is astonishing to me.
Yeah. I'm amazed people are so weird about that painting. I don't get it.
I don't either, but those, what are they called? Extinction Rebellion protesters threw soup on it not too long ago.
Yeah.
So the frame is in the storeroom, but there's no painting. Holmes finds 2 thumbprints on the glass, and there are these copies around by an artist who makes a living making these copies. So they go to visit the artist, who describes how difficult it is to make good copies of artworks.
Yeah, he phrases it as to make a bad copy is easy, but a good one takes years of practice. And I'm like, yes. I mean, I could make a bad copy of the Mona Lisa right now. This is not an informative statement.
Give me a ballpoint pen.
It's also drawing or painting, or somebody in there was painting from a nude model, right? And the government guy goes to just stand in front of this nude woman and leer at her.
So yeah, there's this naked female model posing. She's wearing the world's most terrible wig.
Yes.
It's like, it's like a really poor copy of a Daenerys Targaryen wig. It's blonde and like clearly polyester. And, Holmes is ignoring all of this, but this French gentleman tries to chat her up. Like you said, just standing right in front of her, and she's like full frontal. And Holmes
And
says,
and the artist is still painting, so she can't move.
right, he's painting her butt.
Yeah.
So Holmes says this artist is good enough to become a forger, but the artist says the copies are different sizes than the original.
Yeah, he goes into how hard it is to make a copy that can fool experts. Da Vinci used, I think he said, Italian poplar wood to paint on. The original paint ingredients are hard to find.
Yep.
So, fun fact, ultramarine at the time was made from ground lapis lazuli.
Oh,
Vermilion was made from cinnabar,
wow.
mercury sulfide, which also features prominently in a Nancy Drew game by Her Interactive.
Oh, okay.
White paint used lead, green often used arsenic.
Yeah.
And apparently Leonardo's brushwork was left-handed, he says.
Ah, yes, and that's true. Da Vinci was left-handed. Yeah, it's amazing that these painters didn't wind up, dying of poisoning.
And some of them might have. I don't know.
Yeah. So the artist says, who would buy one of my copies as the original when the real Mona Lisa is in the Louvre? But we know that Mona Lisa is not in the Louvre. Holmes identifies the thief. He's a Spanish man named Mendoza. And one of these two Frenchmen says, what if he has already sold the painting? And Holmes says he would not have done so. He's a pawn in a much bigger game. Then the Frenchman says, what master criminal would want to own the Mona Lisa? He can't sell it, which contradicted himself from like 2 minutes ago. What if he sold it? Well, we know he can't sell it. Holmes says that the master criminal doesn't want to sell it. He wants to sell the forged copies in lieu
as
of
the original.
Yeah.
Which doesn't really answer the question of, well, why would,
Yeah.
who's going to buy that though? Like, what can you do with that?
Just the pleasure of owning it, I guess.
I guess. Holmes also says that the French police are ahead of the British when it comes to fingerprints, and references Bertillon. I don't know how to pronounce this correctly, but he was the guy who came up with
Bertillon.
Anthropomorphic measurements. Like that you identify somebody by measuring the proportions of the body kind of thing. So fingerprints then came along and were like, hey, what if we just do like one part of the body that's demonstrably unique? And
Right.
Bertillon eventually was like, fine. And Holmes says that he was kind enough to refer to Holmes's little pamphlet on the subject of fingerprints as his Bible.
So Holmes says the next step is to quote unquote alarm Mendoza the thief so that he leads them to Moriarty. And they need to announce to the world that the Mona Lisa has been stolen. And of course the French get upset at this, but Holmes shuts them up. They need to follow that announcement with another saying that the criminal is about to be arrested. And then we see Holmes and the Frenchman at what looks like, I don't know, it looks kind of like Covent Garden, but it's in Paris, presumably. It's a fruit and flower market. Mm-hmm. Mendoza is wandering around with a painting wrapped in brown paper, like out in the open. And he nods to another man who sits down next to him at one of these little, metal table and chairs that are in public places. Reminds me a lot of the setup in Bryant Park or Union Square.
Yeah.
And so that man sits down next to him. Mendoza gets up. He leaves the painting, and the other man takes it. And at that point, the French give chase, and they get the painting. And then we see Moriarty in his library lair, whatever. Yeah. With the Mona Lisa in a frame on an easel. And he's, alongside an assistant, Moriarty is talking to an American billionaire about the virtues of the brushwork, the technique, etc. This assistant is dressed all in white, like seersucker for some reason.
Yeah, and he's a very young man.
He is. Yes, still wet behind the ears.
Yes.
And he's interrupted by a butler who's carrying a message on a silver platter. And we see from the expression on Moriarty's face that it's not good news. Moriarty turns back to the billionaire and says, "I very much regret to tell you that this painting is no longer for sale." And the billionaire tries to bargain with him.
Yeah, he offers $4 million for it, which in today's money is just short of $650 million.
Yeah, I wonder if you can even ascribe a value to the Mona Lisa at this point, because it's so mythological.
Yeah, probably not.
It was also a feature in Knives Out, Glass Onion, by the way.
Yes.
The billionaire, Edward Norton guy. This has been drummed into me because I work for a company that he founded. But he had the Mona Lisa behind glass. But
I forgot about that.
Yeah. The billionaire is bargaining with him in a very sort of American way. You know, you can tell it's like a stereotypical British view of rich, gauche Americans. But Moriarty is firm, and the assistant grabs the billionaire and ushers him out, which is easy to do because you could snap him like a twig.
Yeah, he's tiny.
Old, frail, small.
Yeah.
And the billionaire's cussing him out the whole time. And Moriarty tells the assistant, "The wretched Holmes has recovered the original. These are worthless," meaning the copies he's commissioned. And the assistant is to burn all of the copies.
I mean, they could still be sold as high-end copies. And then I added in my notes, okay, or maybe they're worthless after Moriarty takes a knife to them, like he's just.
Yeah. So Moriarty's pissed. And he's scratching and wrecking the copy that's on the easel. And next we see Holmes getting an award from the French government, presumably the Legion d'Honneur.
Yeah, I assume he's wearing a sash anyway.
Yes. So coming back to the present at 221B, so Holmes has banged up his hands climbing in through the window, and Watson's tending to these nicks on his hands. And I just found this so funny because as he's dabbing like disinfectant on the cuts, Holmes is like flinching like a kid.
Aw.
Yes. I'm like, oh, is that mercurochrome? Really? Or is it iodine?
I pour rubbing alcohol on my cuts and scratches.
Yeah, yeah.
But be sure to kill all the bacteria.
Yes, I use Neosporin.
I follow up with Neosporin, but I clean it with rubbing alcohol.
Cannot do it. No, I'm just like Holmes there. Cannot. So Holmes tells Watson he hadn't been back home for half an hour, from France before the visitor came. And, then we're back that morning in 221B. We hear Mrs. Hudson yelling futilely up the stairs, "You cannot go up there, sir." And it is, of course, Moriarty going up there. And they stare one another down in this scene. Moriarty says, "You have less frontal development than I should have expected." Which is apparently what he says instead of hello.
Yeah.
And
cool.
then
Thanks for coming to my house to insult me. Bye.
Right. He tells Holmes it's dangerous to go around with a loaded pistol in his pocket. And Holmes is in his nightshirt and his robe, presumably just having come out of the bath or whatever. Holmes takes the gun out, puts it on the table. It's, again, one of the smallest guns I've ever seen in my life.
Well, if you're going to stick it in your bathrobe pocket, it's probably going to be small.
Mm-hmm. And then Moriarty comes in and he closes the door. "You evidently don't know me," Moriarty says, and he's poking around at Holmes's very valuable violin. He's plucking at the strings of the Stradivarius. And Holmes says, "On the contrary, I think it's fairly evident that I do."
Yeah, I have a gun nearby. I'm pretty sure I know who you are.
And he tells Moriarty he can spare him 5 minutes to say what he has to say. And Moriarty says the famous line, "All that I have to say has already crossed your mind." Which
Holmes says, "Then my answer has already crossed yours."
Actually, he didn't say that.
Really?
Not in this. No, he may have in the original, and he certainly did in
I have that as in not.
the.
I like actually wrote that down. Are you
Oh
sure?
my god! Yeah, no, I was looking for it. It didn't happen.
What did he say then?
He didn't say anything. Moriarty said, "You frustrated me in the matter of the French gold," and then Holmes says, "So it was you behind the Red-Headed League," and he starts complimenting Moriarty's genius in that case.
Mm-hmm.
Moriarty's got this little red notebook, and he's reading various episodes where Holmes had foiled his evil plans, in February and March, blah, 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 blah.
He says that because of Holmes's continual persecution, he's now in danger of losing his liberty.
Yes, he's in danger of going to prison.
Yeah. So anyone who hasn't read Nicholas Meyer's 7% Solution, I highly recommend it.
Yes, yes.
The premise, and I think we've talked about this before, the premise is that Holmes's cocaine addiction has kind of taken over, and he's in a delusional state where he thinks this completely innocuous mathematics professor is a master criminal.
Oh, right. Oh my God, it's been so long since I've read that. So he says to Holmes, it's an impossible situation. And Holmes asks him what suggestions he has. And Moriarty says, you must drop it. You really must, What if I refuse? And Moriarty says that basically Holmes absolutely has to. You've worked things in such a fashion that we only have one resource left. And he in turn compliments Holmes's genius in solving all these crimes. It would be a grief to me, he says, to essentially have to kill Holmes. And it's all very, I don't know, it's all very gentlemanly.
Yeah.
Good sport and everything. Holmes tells Moriarty he's got places to be, so the conversation's over. And Moriarty says he's done what he could. Like, really? And Moriarty goes to get his cane, and he flips some kind of switch on it while pointing the cane at Holmes's gun on the table. And he says, this is a duel. If you bring destruction on me, I will do as much for you. And then he turns around, picks up his hat, and goes to the door. And we don't know what the deal is with the cane.
Yeah.
Holmes wraps his dressing gown more tightly around himself. And from bending the willow, we're meant to understand that he is legit scared. And he says, you have paid me several compliments, Mr. Moriarty. And note that he says Mr. and not Professor.
And not Professor, yeah.
Doctor.
It's a veiled insult.
Yeah. Let me pay you one by saying, if I were assured of the former eventuality, I would, in the interest of the public, cheerfully accept the latter. In other words, if he could be sure that Moriarty would be dead, he'd happily be dead too.
Yes.
And Moriarty says, I can promise you the one, but not the other. And slams the door. He leaves 2-1B in a huff.
I can promise you that I will be dead, but not you.
Right. Well, he doesn't, I can promise you the one, but not the other. And we're meant to take that.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's staring up at Holmes as he gets into his carriage, and Holmes wraps himself tighter in his dressing gown. Like, he really hates all of this. In a way, there's a parallel to, the gospel story of let this chalice pass from my lips, kind of, I would really rather not, but if I have to, I will, kind of thing. So Holmes has been telling this tale, but it's now dark. So it's taken all day. And
they're
Holmes,
sitting in the dark. They're lit by candles.
Yeah. And Holmes says he's the Napoleon of crime. And he's been after Moriarty for a long time, and now I'm ready to close upon him. If he doesn't close upon you first, says Watson. And yeah, he's lighting these candles in the darkness. Holmes tells him that next Monday, Moriarty and his gang will be in the hands of the police. And Watson looks like a combination of horrified and mystified. And Holmes says, then will come the greatest criminal trial of the century, the clearing up of over 40 mysteries, and rope for all of them. And then he says he needs to get away until then, and
Yes.
invites Watson to Switzerland. And Watson is delighted, but he doesn't see how they're going to get out of 221B without being followed. So Holmes tells him that he's going to leave that evening. It's too dangerous for Watson if Holmes remains at 221B. So he's going to go stay with Mycroft, but he tells Watson to do everything. He says, "You are now playing a double-handed game with me against the most powerful syndicate of criminals in Europe." So he gives Watson these instructions. He's to send his luggage on ahead of him that night. In the morning, he's to send Mrs. Hudson out onto the street to hail a cab. Not the first one, not the second one, but the third one. He's to take the cab to the Strand end of, and I didn't catch what he said in the original story. It's Lowther Arcade, which was a shopping district in London, just like a small street, but it doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. The subtitles are so terrible.
Yeah, they're really.
I was like, I can't interpret this. I don't know what. But anyway, so Watson is to hand the address to the cabman and ask him not to throw it away. Once he gets to that address, he's to run through the mews and get to the other side, the non-Strand side, apparently, at 9:15 in the morning, where a small brougham will be waiting for him. The driver will be in a heavy black coat, tipped at the collar with red. He will take the brougham to Victoria Station to catch the Continental Express. So just a little bit of geographical history. Victoria Station's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's big. It's huge. It serves the tube and local and regional trains. So it's a lot like Grand Central or Penn Station, where, it's Grand Central, it's all the Metro North trains, and Penn Station, it's the New Jersey Transit.
Mm-hmm.
But these days for international travel, people have to go to St. Pancras to catch the Eurostar, which goes underneath the channel to get to Paris. So Watson does everything to the letter, and he arrives at the train.
It involves a lot of running.
Yes, a lot of running. I mean, it's a good thing he's fit. He arrives at the train out of breath, looking for Holmes. Mm-hmm. A conductor approaches him and asks him if he speaks Italian. And Watson says no. And the conductor says he better get on board. And the train leaves with no sign of Holmes, even though he's the one who reserved the compartment.
Yeah, and Watson is sticking his head out of the window of the train as it's leaving, looking for Holmes and negating all of the hiding stuff that Holmes and me do.
So in the corner of the train compartment behind Watson, there is a pastor, a cleric with a sharp chin and nose and a big hat. And it's Holmes. He's greeting Watson. Watson's so startled.
Yes.
And Holmes whips off the chin and the teeth and the nose and the hat and the attached wig. And he says it is necessary to take every precaution.
Yeah, and the train is leaving just as Moriarty arrives at the station.
Yes, and Moriarty's clearly dismayed.
Yeah.
So Watson says, and he's got his little guidebook with him, that the train is going to arrive at Dover at the same time that the boat will take them across the channel. In other words, they're going to make a perfect connection. And he wonders how Moriarty will make the boat if he's missed this train. Holmes says that he will engage a special train. And Watson says he'll get there too late. And Holmes says, you will observe from your Bradshaw, which is the guidebook, that Watson presumably carries around with him everywhere, because this is not the first episode where it's materialized.
Yeah.
That the train stops at Canterbury first, and then the boat. And Moriarty will catch them at Canterbury. And Watson is understandably annoyed, and I would be too. He says, anyone would think that we are the criminals. Let's arrest him as soon as he arrives. No, says Holmes, that would ruin everything. We should catch the big fish, and the smaller would dart out of the net. No, 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 and the rest is inadmissible.
Yeah.
So basically,
without the testimony from the smaller fish, there's not really anything to pin on Moriarty, is essentially what he's saying.
And that is still how,
that's how the feds work.
For like the mafia and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, and RICO laws are specifically constructed that way.
Yeah.
So at Canterbury, they get off the train. They leave their luggage on the train to give Moriarty something to follow.
Okay, but doesn't Moriarty have to stay in the country to be caught?
Doesn't Moriarty have to stay in the country to be caught?
Yeah, because the idea is that everybody's going to be arrested on Monday.
Oh, yeah. Not necessarily. Maybe it's a global kind of thing. Like the hammer's coming down in multiple countries.
Maybe.
I mean, this is before Interpol, so probably not. But it has been known to happen. Again, these huge gang arrests in multiple countries.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look up, like there was a recent mafia big bust that was multi-country. Some in Sicily, some in, I want to say, Greece, and some on Staten Island, because it's the mob.
Yeah, I live in New Jersey. It's the mob.
Yeah. So Watson again whips out his Bradshaw. And he's putting together a plan where if they take these local and regional trains across Europe, across England, they'll get to Brighton, where they'll take a boat to Vienna. Even have time.
It'll give them time for an early lunch.
But this is not to be. Another train pulls in at Canterbury. Holmes and Watson are hiding behind some luggage on the platform, and we see the train is just one car. And Moriarty is leering menacingly out the rear window. He does not see Holmes and Watson. And Holmes says, there are limits, you see, even to our friend's intelligence. And he does look pretty silly. So they go to buy a few carpet bags and spend a charming week in Europe, headed towards the Alps. They're traveling with a guide and some horses when a small avalanche sends some rocks downhill. So that's foreshadowing. Watson's wary, but Holmes says it's a common enough occurrence. They stop at a small inn for some local wine, and Watson is wearing a cute Tyrolean hat. He's totally into this, like he's grooving. The landlady brings them a telegram from Mycroft. All of Moriarty's gang has been captured, except for Moriarty.
Yeah, nobody was watching him, apparently.
Except for Holmes and Watson. Holmes says he thinks Watson should return to England. You will find me a very dangerous companion now. Moriarty will devote all of his energies to taking his revenge upon me. And Watson says, do you want to be rid of me? No, says Holmes, apart from the reasons I've given. We've been in tight places before together, Watson replies. Never as tight as this one. And Watson says, I'm not leaving you, Holmes. Not unless you order me to go.
Ride or die.
And Holmes does not order him to go. And again, I mean, Watson is narrating all of this. He is so enthralled by this landscape.
I mean, it is beautiful. It makes me want to go to Switzerland.
So they really went there.
It looks like it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these are not backdrops. This is real. They spent a ton of money. And we are going to eventually contrast it with the amount of money that was being spent towards the end of all of these. This is not the same. So Watson's comparing it to the North provinces of India, although presumably significantly less hot. But he notes that Holmes could not escape the shadow that lay across him.
Mm-hmm.
And Holmes is puffing on his pipe, and he's watching his travelers cross the mountains, and he's examining every face to see if it's Moriarty. And they're periodically making camp and resting a little bit when a gunshot hits a nearby tree.
Holmes and Watson make a very leisurely examination.
Yes.
It's not, oh God, Moriarty is after me and he might shoot me. It's,
Oh,
good.
good.
That was
So
weird, right?
Holmes gets out a small telescope and he sees a figure with a rifle making its way across this wide grassy slope, which doesn't strike me that he's trying to hide.
Yeah, and like again, that might take some alarm at that if I were Holmes. And instead Holmes is like, yeah, I don't see anything. It's fine.
Yeah, now Watson asks him what he sees and Holmes says nothing.
Yeah.
So they leave their camp and they keep going to Meringen. How do you
That sounds right. Yeah.
Meringen, where they stay at an inn called the Englischer Hof. So they're in the German-speaking part of Switzerland, as opposed to the French or the Italian-speaking part, which may be why the conductor was asking
Yeah.
Watson spoke Italian. I have a friend, former boss, who grew up in the Italian portion of Switzerland. So he's fluent in multiple languages.
Cool.
Yeah. So the landlord of the Englischer Hof is a man named Steiler, and he greets them as they arrive. In the background, you can hear the roar of the Reichenbach Falls.
Mhm.
And as gorgeous as the environment is, the sinister music continues in the background. So they're up in their rooms. Holmes, from his window, sees Moriarty accompanied by this rifleman through his telescope. And it's a real contrast because Watson is leaning out his window and he's smelling the flowers and he's entranced by the beauty of the mountains.
I mean, what else are you going to do when Holmes is the one keeping
Yes.
keeping an eye for everything?
They're in two completely different headspaces.
Yes.
And then they're down at a table at the front of the inn, and the landlord is giving them local tips and telling them they can't miss the Reichenbach. So off they go. And at the falls, Holmes and Watson marvel at how dangerous it looks. The water is rushing past violently.
Mm-hmm.
They begin making their way to the top when a boy comes running up behind them with a note shouting for Herr Dr. Watson. And he says, Herr Steiler told me to give you this. It is very urgent. So according to the note, an English woman has been stricken by tuberculosis. She's hemorrhaging and she's dying. And an English doctor would be a great consolation. So clearly, as Watson is a gentleman doctor, it's his job to head back to the hotel. And so the boy is going to accompany Holmes the rest of the way to the top of the falls. And Holmes has got this big stick with a hook on it. It's an enormous stick. It looks, yeah. So as Holmes is continuing with his stick, the boy suddenly turns and runs away. Watson notices a caped figure climbing towards the top of the falls.
A man in black heading up there, and he does
we know
absolutely nothing. It's like, huh.
But Watson's never seen Moriarty. So he doesn't know him from a hole in the wall. I mean, he should. Because Moriarty's practically got that black cape and like evil villain.
Yes, he really does. God.
If he only had a mustache to twirl. So he keeps going back to the hotel, but he discovers the tubercular woman is a ruse. He's been had. And Steiler tells him, there was a tall old Englishman who came here after you had gone. And I froze here because I was transcribing. And before Steiler can finish the sentence, Watson bolts off back towards the falls again. It's a very funny scene to freeze frame on. Because Watson's like this blur. And then we see Holmes and Moriarty meeting at a bridge near the top of the falls. And they're staring at one another from opposite sides of the bridge. Watson rushes onto the scene, but both Holmes and Moriarty are gone. Holmes's big walking stick remains propped up on a nearby rock, and it begins to sink into Watson what's really going on. And he starts calling for Holmes through the.
Well, he says, so I tried to use some of Holmes's methods to try to practice them, and he puts his hands to his mouth and shouts.
You're right. Right. Which, I mean, again, you're in the Swiss Alps. Loud noises could cause an avalanche.
But also, like that's his idea of applying Holmes' methods, and to just stand there and scream his name. Okay.
Yeah. And then he comes across a note that Holmes has left for him, which says, I'm pleased that I may be able to rid society of Moriarty's presence, though I fear it is at a cost which will give pain to my friends, especially my dear Watson, to you. As you know, my career had, in any case, reached a crisis. No possible conclusion could be more congenial to me than this, which is bullshit. There's nothing wrong with his career. We see Holmes scribbling this out as Moriarty's looking on. Ever the gentleman, giving him time to write this note.
There's a book, I think it's by Michael Hardwick, called Sherlock Holmes: My Life and Crimes, and it's sort of an alternative explanation for the whole Reichenbach thing. But there's this scene where Holmes is like, "Look, just give me a minute to write this note to Watson, so that he'll think we had a fight and jumped off." And Moriarty's like, he's really gonna think that I was like, "Fine, I'll just stand here while you write this note, and then we'll fight to the death." Holmes is like, "Look, he's a really good guy, okay?"
So Holmes, in his note, he tells Watson that he knew that the letter for Watson was a hoax. Holmes has put all of his affairs in order, given all the paperwork to Mycroft, and then he says goodbye and good luck, and believe me to be very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
And Watson starts to cry, which really is kind of heart-wrenching.
It is. Yeah. He's actually weeping.
I know, you want to hug him.
And then we see Moriarty and Holmes grappling with one another.
Yeah, this is kind of Watson's imaginings of how it happened.
But they're playing it out for us to see.
Yeah, and it's again, Cobra Kai isn't going to be trying to recruit either of these men. It's almost more like a ballet than a fight, the way it's choreographed.
And lots of hands in your opponent's face.
Yes, but not really doing anything, like trying to gouge out eyes or anything.
No, just like being there,
just like don't come near me. Be an arm's length away from me, please.
Like a starship on a starfish on a rock.
Yes,
just like. So then, with it's very dramatic. Lots of flailing. They go over the falls.
Yeah, they like lose their balance and tip over.
And they hit the rocks below.
Yeah, they go over the falls in bad CGI or bad green screen or whatever it was.
Well, because what we also see are two steel cables that are holding up the stuntmen. It's very. I froze this scene again and again. I
was wearing my reading glasses, so I didn't notice. I was just like, wow, that's really bad CGI right there.
So one of the stuntmen is the same guy who played one of the thugs in the opening scene.
Oh, wow.
His name is Alf Joint. And Bending the Willow describes this scene as painful because they had to do, take upon take. And the stuntman had to be winched back up again.
Oh, God.
Before they went, Yeah. So at the end, Jeremy Brett apparently met them back at the top with a bottle of champagne. To acknowledge their courage, because it was, a terrifying set of stunt work.
Yeah. Jeez.
So Watson, back at 221B, concludes, "It's with a heavy heart that I take up my pen to write these last words in which I shall ever record the singular gifts by which my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, was distinguished. I shall ever regard him as the best and wisest man I have ever known." And the camera is focusing in on these Holmesian artifacts.
Yeah.
The cigarette case, the hypodermic needle.
Yeah, and that mournful music is playing.
Yep, exactly. So this episode is
and we see the bad green screen again.
Yes.
Closing credits.
This episode, they're very proud of that. They had to reuse that footage. This episode is the final one in this series that's called The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. But there are also 2 TV movies and 3 additional series. So Jeremy Brett is putting the hours in, as are we. This is also David Burke's last appearance as Dr. Watson. And apparently this is because he had been commuting from Kent, where his wife and son were living in a remote cottage, he said, to Manchester. And it was just too much for him.
Wow, that's like all the way across the country.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he just couldn't take it anymore, basically.
Yeah, I don't blame him.
And it's also the first episode where the crew left the UK for filming. The Reichenbach scenes were actually filmed at a nearby set of falls called Geisbach. not at actual Reichenbach itself.
Mhm.
I guess it was just too unwieldy and complicated. It's a smaller set of falls,
Yeah.
more controllable. So yeah,
Very cool.
I liked this a lot, despite the fact that the Louvre was not the Louvre, and my suspension of disbelief was completely demolished at that point. um, but yeah, I also like the idea of, you know, being able to hike across the Alps and stop at these little inns and drink the local wine and like all of
Yeah.
that.
Oh, that'd be nice. That'd be a great vacation.
Yes. Well, it's kind of like the boys go revisit their grand tour years.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, after university or before, you would go to Europe for a few months and just go around everywhere and
Yeah.
bring back a lot of art.
As the Brits tend to do.
Yes, yes, exactly. But yeah,
There were stories later of how this short story was received when it was published. That people would wear black armbands mourning the death of Sherlock Holmes. That apparently there are no contemporary accounts of that. Apparently, the earliest I think is like 10 years afterwards. So that very likely probably didn't happen.
oh God, I wonder who made that up.
It's some newspaper reporter.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a nice story.
It is. It is. Yeah. So Moriarty was played by an actor called Eric Porter.
Mhm.
He had a whole. He said to the director Michael Cox, "I'm collecting great English villains. I've notched up Soames, Forsyth, and Fagin. I couldn't resist this monster." So, villains are what he does as his career. Um, and he did a really,
He did a really good job. I really liked him.
yeah, I did too. I liked him better. I mean, look, I love Andrew Scott. I think he's a great actor, but
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I like Eric Porter better.
yeah, I don't think that he's the Moriarty is like the Mad Hatter kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Just how
Yeah, I mean you can't be at the center of that kind of web and be just batshit crazy. You have to be you have to be a psychopath. You have to be very cold and organized.
yes. Yeah, and the way, I mean, Andrew Scott played him as like cute and fun and crazy and menacing, but he's still cute, he's like a little pet.
Yeah.
And and that's just because Andrew Scott is cute. He also played the hot priest in what is it called? Fleabag.
Oh.
And yeah, his interpretation lacked the gravitas of Eric Porter's. And I really felt like Eric Porter was a much better foil for Jeremy Brett.
Yep.
So
yeah.
So yeah, that's wow.
Yeah, it was like Holmes's all of Holmes's qualities, but just emphasized to the nth degree. All of the like cold, precise logic that Watson keeps using to describe Holmes, even though it's not really true. But like Moriarty kind of is the way Watson describes Holmes as being.
And this is the most lavish that the series is ever going to get. So, this was the climax of the first season, as we say in the US. But a Granada was looking at this and saying, "Hey, it's a success, so we can cut the budget now."
Aren't you supposed to increase the budget when you have a success?
No, we're going to cut the budget. And so this is the last kind of like a blowout in terms of like no expense spared filming. And you can tell from the Alpine scenery. It's gorgeous. And I just love the way that Watson is like getting into it with his little outfits and his Tyrolean hat.
Yeah, that'd be me.
With the +4s and whatnot.
Yeah, I really liked this.
I did too.
I'm really glad we didn't have more than one episode of it.
Yes. Yeah. Also drawing it out is a problem. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it would have gotten tiresome if it was more than just this one episode. But for a one episode break from the norm, it was fun. In a sad sort of way.
We're gonna get Edward Hardwicke next.
Yep.
At the suggestion of David Burke. Because David Burke and his wife Anna was also an actress, wanted to take a job at Stratford, which is even worse of a commute. And their son was like 2 or 3 years old at this time.
Oh.
So yeah, David Burke was like, this is impossible. And so he dragged in Edward Hardwicke to take his place.
And we will meet him next week.
We will. Any other thoughts on this episode? It moved very quickly.
Yeah, it did. I don't think I have anything else. I think we've covered it.
Okay. Great. Well, what's on tap for next week?
Okay, so that is all from us this week. If you've enjoyed the show and haven't subscribed yet, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support us, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends. And join us next week when we'll be discussing the 2 biggest questions we're left with. Is Sherlock Holmes dead? And will anyone notice that Watson looks and sounds like a completely different person in the empty house? Spoiler, the answer to both is no.
No. I love it. Oh my God. And The Empty House is also one of my favorites stories. Yeah. So, all right. I will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.